Hello everyone, welcome back to day 5 of our Flutter Mentorship program. So I want to believe that you all enjoyed the last class and you were able to answer the questions that I gave, and also you learned some few things concerning UI, widgets, and all that, right? So if you know you learned something, let me know in the comment section, right? Just drop a message or anything telling me that you understood what I taught in the last section. All right, so today we are going to be looking at something, we are going to be looking at an amazing topic, and it's going to be handling user input and navigation. Let me quickly bring up this slide. Okay, so this is just a one-page slide. So what we are going to be looking at today is all about making our app interactive. We'll cover how users input data, validate it, and navigate between screens, right, in Flutter. So these are the topics that we are going to be looking at. We are going to be looking at TextField, okay, a way of capturing user input in Flutter. And we are going to be looking at handling button presses, which is gesture detection. So we are going to detect tabs and perform actions whenever those buttons are tapped, okay? I gave an example in our last class where I showed you guys how to use elevated button, raised button, right, and test button. Yeah, so I showed you guys the on long press and on tap. So we are also going to look at we are going to create a simple, at the end of this class, we're going to create a simple login screen, right? But before that, we are going to create forms. You know how to create forms. We are going to do validation on those forms and handle user input as well in the form. And we will be doing that with the help of the test field, right? And then we are going to I'm going to show you guys how we can navigate between screens. So we'll be using the Navigator.push and pop, right, in order to navigate from one screen to another and also return back to the previous screen that we navigated from. Then finally, we are going to create a simple login screen. Okay, so this is going to be an amazing, interesting topic. So make sure you pay close attention for everything I'm going to say. All right, so this is what we did in our last class. We created a simple profile screen and I talked about different widgets that we have in Flutter. Okay, so before I move on, I'm going to show you guys, I'm going to create a new folder here, right? A new file inside this lib directory, because if you watch the past video, I told you that any Flutter related code must be inside the lib directory. Okay, so I'll be creating, let's call this one user input example. Okay, all right, let me increase this font a little. Okay, so this user input example, I'm not going to create any material app for it, because when you're building an app for Flutter, you are only required to use material app once. But if you're we have material app and Cupertino app. So if you're building for iOS specifically, you can use Cupertino app. But if you are targeting Android and iOS, you can stick with material app because it's going to accommodate for both of them, right? So what I'm going to do, this is our home screen, right? This home screen just talks about this profile screen. So I wanted to show you guys, let me give you guys just a little touch on navigation between screen, like using the Navigator.push before we talk about TextField, because I don't want to like remove this profile screen entirely. I want to create a button, and when we tap on that button, it's going to take us to another screen, right? Then later I will come back and then explain from the beginning, talking about TextField, gesture detector, and the rest. Okay, so let me quickly do that for us. I'm going to create the user input example. So here I'm going to use a stateful widget, right? I'm going to call this user input example. So this is the class, the name of our new screen, okay? Now to navigate into this screen, right now, there is no way to see this screen, right? So what I'm going to do, I'm going to go to our main.dat, And inside here, I'm going to create a button. Just call it next screen. So I'll scroll down. Remember this elevated button that we created before. So I'll just copy it and paste it. Let me add some spacing between them. All right, something like this. And I'm going to change the title to next screen. Okay. So I showed you guys how to use onPress, right? This onPress is part of gesture, like handling user input, like it's part of gesture detection. Okay, so I'm using this elevated button now to talk about buttons and gesture detector. I talked about test button in the previous class. So when you have something like this, you can see this onPress. This is another way of handling actions, right? Making our app interactive. So, but let me navigate to the next screen that I just created. So what I'm going to do now to navigate to a new screen, we are going to use this Navigator, right? Dot push, right? Dot push, you can see that it takes a context. If you hover on this push, you see that it takes a context and it also takes a route. So inside this route, we are going to say material page route, right? So this is going to give our app that material feel, right? But if you are building for iOS, you can use something like Cupertino page route. So this is going to give us that iOS field when we are navigating between screens. Okay, so you can use anyone. You can use material page route. You can use the Cupertino page route. So let's just stick with a material page route for this example. So you can go and experiment with both of them. So this material page route, if you hover, you will see that it takes a builder. So this builder is going to reference the screen that we want to navigate to. Okay. There are also other properties that you can experiment with, though I don't normally use them. And yeah. So here now, this builder, if you notice, is a function that takes a context. So that means I'm going to use parentheses, passing my context. Then I will use the fat arrow that we discussed. This is a fat arrow function that we discussed in our Dart class. Okay, so make sure you go back and learn that. Then I'm now going to call the name of the screen that I want to navigate to. In this case, user input example. Okay, so I'm just going to put it here. It's more like a class, so just make sure you import it. So to import it, currently it's showing red because the method isn't defined. So what we need to do is to click on this light bulb here. It's going to tell us import library, Flutterfest app slash user input example. So it's going to reference the part where the file is created. So you click enter, save it. And now you'll notice whenever I click on this button, it's going to take us to this other screen. So watch what happens. Once I tap, it's going to take us to that screen. You can see that. So if you're wondering how to go back, if you tap, it's going to take us to this screen. So most times, going back is just, you can use your side, you can just swipe left to go back, depending on how your Android or your iOS device is configured. Then you can also use a button to pop the user back to the previous screen. You can also use the app bar, just click, it's going to pop it for you. So in this case now, let's go back to our user input example. You all know why it's showing blank, right? Because we use placeholder. And I told you, whenever you want to create a new screen, always make sure you use your scaffold widget because it's going to give us a lot of properties to work with. And in this case, it has an app bar. We can now put an app bar here. So when you put an app bar, automatically it has a back button. It generates a back button for us automatically. So what this means, when we click on it, it's going to take us back to the previous screen that created the recent screen. Okay, like that created a new screen. So once you tap, it's going to take us back. And if you click, it's going to call this Navigator.push, right? Route. So yeah, I'm going to talk about navigation later, but for now, I just want to show you guys. I want to take it step by step. The reason why I talked about this navigation now is because I wanted to create a new screen and then just navigate to that screen so that we can perform our examples. Okay. So I'm going to take it one after the other, just as it is here. So I've talked about buttons, right? I'll also talk about gesture detection. You can use on press as part of a gesture detector, right? On press and all that. But I want to show you another way that you make any widget to be interactive. We can make a test widget to be interactive. We can make test widget like this to be interactive. We can make anything. This whole body, we can also make it to be interactive. That's where gesture detection comes in. Okay, I'm going to talk about it. So for now, let's focus on test feed. So what is test feed? Is a way that is a widget that allows us to capture user input in Flutter. So if you are working with forms, you are signing up, and let's say you're using Facebook or any social media app or any app at all that requires authentication. At some point, they will ask you to input your email and your password, right? So that process of inputting your email and password, the widget that is accepting that your email and password is called a test feed. Okay, that's an input feed, test feed that is accepting your values. All right, so here I'm going to quickly create a body and let me put my column, right? So inside here, I'm going to create the input field. Let me just say name field. After that name field, I'm also going to create email field. All right. So to do this, I'm going to use test feed. There are two ways, but I prefer almost all my projects. I use a different field. This is test field, right? If you save it now, you will notice this line here. Okay. And when you tap, it's going to bring up the keyboard. All right. I think I disabled keyboard on this. Let me enable it. Yeah. So this is the keyboard. You can see whenever you go back, it's going to go off. If you click next screen and tap on that screen, you can see now you can type whatever you want to type. You can click on done. So aside this test feed, there is also another widget that we can use to accept inputs. I do normally use a test form feed. I don't know why, but that's the first thing that comes to my mind whenever I'm working with inputs. I normally use test form feed. Okay, I've not really checked the difference, but the test form field is really giving me what I want, but they still perform the same action. So if you click on it here, you can see the both of them still have, you can also type in something. So let me add some spacing to these guys to just give them some height of 20. All right, save it. So I just need some spacing there. So right now you can see these widgets, they are so close to the edge of the screen. So I don't want that. So remember the same thing that we did here, where we wrapped this widget with padding. That's the same thing I'm going to do here. I'm going to wrap this column with a padding widget, and let's give it 20. All right, so just to create some space around it. So now we have our two form fields. We can type inside and all that. You can see this is taking the full string. You can see whenever we tap on the keyboard, it brings out test, right? You can also modify this keyboard to bring up something else, which is like if you want it to only accept numbers, you can do that by, if you hover here, you will see that it has a lot of properties. This one has undo controller. Okay, it has a lot of properties. It has star, it has read only. If you want it to only be tapped, users cannot edit. They can only see what is in it. We also have obscure text, so max line, minimum line, right? We have unchanged. Unchanged means as users is typing, you're going to be printing out the input. Maybe you want to validate the strength of the password and all that. You use the unchanged property, okay? You also need, we have on tab, when user taps on it, you can also do a lot of things. It has, I think the difference now between this test feed and test form feed, I think test feed has a lot of properties that you can work with. Both of them have. So they have properties though, but this test form feed doesn't have undo controller. I have not used that undo controller before, but this one has it. If you will notice, you will see this undo controller. So let me just show you something. I think first, let's try to style this test form field, maybe to just show a hint, label, and something. Let's say we have our decoration, input decoration, right? So we save it, input decoration, we can do something like border. Let's use outline input border. So we save it. You can see how it's looking now. It has an outline around it. So this test field, if you are able to study it, you're going to see a lot of things that you can work with. You can also change the style, the color of the text inside to something else and all that. Okay. So here now, let's check how we can add a label. So a label is just a widget that we can just say, that will just tell users, okay, what they need to type here. Let's just say, for instance, full name. All right, you can see how the label is shown here. If this is empty, it's going to show like a hint. So let me say I edit, clear it. If it's not active, it's going to show like a hint, full name. When you tap on it, it's going to move the hint to become a label just around it, so users will know what they need to type inside that particular field. Okay, so that's it for test form field. You can also explore how to change the colors and all that. So for now, I'm going to show you guys later how to retrieve the string, like whatever user typed inside here, right? So another thing again I want to show us is the unchanged property. So this unchanged is another way that we can retrieve values from the test form field. But this one is always fetched whenever, as the user is typing, we are seeing the value. So let me try to print out this value here. So as the user is typing, we are getting the values immediately. So you can see my console now, whatever I type, the unchanged property is getting it. Okay. We also have another one on submitted, right? So this unsubmitted is called, it's not called when users are typing, it's called immediately user clicks on done, right? It gets triggered. You can see that done. It returns the value, the initial value that the user entered. So let's say this one, let me just type in something else and then I click. Okay, I think I passed number string. Let me just put this. All right, if you click on done now, you're going to see it's going to return the value that the user entered here. So that's it for test form field. This is a way that we can capture user input in Flutter. All right, it's very simple. You just have to put in the time to study it. Okay. Now let's move over to test form field. They are still the same thing. You can use any one you prefer, test field or test form field. So I can't give you a specific scenario where you need to use one and you don't need to use one. So just know what you want to do. Yeah, you can use any one. So let's do another one, which is phone. So this phone, I want to change the keyboard type. I want the keyboard type to be a full. All right. So this has already given me a hint. So let me remove this. All right. So here we have unchanged. We have the keyboard type. Keyboard type is a property that is available. You can see keyboard type. It has a lot of keyboard type takes a type of text input type. So once you say text input type, you can now do dot date, time, email address, phone number, and all that. Okay. If we say phone, right? If I click on it, it's not going to bring up a keyboard. It's not going to bring up a test kind of UI for us. It's not going to bring up the capitals like letters. It's going to bring up numbers so we can type in numbers. But if we tap on this one, because by default is already test, so it's going to bring up test. You can see the difference. You can also modify it because test keyboard type is also available on test field, so you don't need to bother. It's still available. So these are something you can work with. All right. So that's it for test field and taking input from users. Okay. So now let's talk about retrieving those inputs from user. Let's say we don't want to use this on change or on submit to retrieve data from users, but we want to use like a button. Once user clicks on a button like submit, we want to be able to get the values inside this input fields. So first thing, let me come here and create a size box and let me create an elevated button with an unpressed. Okay, I don't want to use an elevated. Okay, let's just use elevated button first. I need to show you guys two things. So we're going to say, call this submit. All right, this is our button, right? Right now, nothing is happening. So what I want to do, whenever we click submit, I want to print out the value from this full name and also the phone number. So to do that, we have two input fields, right? Phone field and name field. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to create a controller. if you notice here, we have this text editing controller. This is what we use to retrieve values from text input field. We also have the controller too available in our text form field, all right? So just know that whatever I'm doing for one is applicable to the second one as well. Test form field, test field, so they are just almost similar. So we are going to create the text editing controller variable here. And we need to make sure the names are unique. So the name of the variable must be unique. So let's say name controller, then let's initialize it here to be text editing controller. So I can copy and duplicate this. So this next one is going to be phone controller. So mind you, if you have more than two text fields, let's say you have phone number, email, age, and all that, different text field, you also need to create their own unique text editing controller. So if you have four text form field, also make sure you create four text form field for the controllers as well. All right. So now moving on, what we are going to do now is to scroll down to our text field. I'm going to create the controller. Now let me pass it, which is name controller. And then inside here, I'm going to create the phone controller for phone. I'm going to create passing the phone controller. I can see now we have been able to use these two variables. All right. So going down here, what I can do is just to print name controller dot test. So when you say dot test, it returns a string. This is how we access the text that is inside this test input field. Okay. If you say dot test, it returns a string for us. So now if I click on submit, right now it's going to be an empty string. Okay. All right, so I was interrupted there. I had to switch to other screen. All right, so I know the view is going to look a little bit different from the initial one, so bear with me. All right, so I was talking about retrieving the name, like the full name from, I know this screen is now smaller, so, but just bear with me. So what I'm going to do now, if I tap on this submit, you can see that this thing is just printing out an empty string for us, right? This is where we are going to talk about validation soon. But for now, let's say we tap, let me change this keyboard type to be, okay, let me go back and return to next screen. All right, so here we have this full name. I'm going to pass, let's say hello, right? If I click done and click on submit, you're going to see the value. All right, so this is just in hello, like the string that we just passed in here. If you can type anything else, if you click on submit, it's going to be retrieved from this controller. All right, you can use this controller to do a lot of things, to validate the string, convert it to string, so many things. All right, so just know that this is how we can retrieve input from users. All right, this is one way. You can also do the same thing for the phone controller.test. So we use this .test to just retrieve the values. So let's just type in something and click submit. You can see now we have our two values. All right. So moving on, I'm going to show us now how we can work with uh, gesture detection. So now I don't want to use an elevated button for this action. Okay. I want to use, let's say I have a test string like this. Let's say this is our test string, right? It's just a test, a normal test. You can see how it's looking. We can decide to style this test a little by wrapping it with a container. Container is also another widget that is available in Flutter. We can use it to style other widgets as well. So let me say I add a decoration to this, box decoration. Okay, so from here, we can create, let's give this a color of colors.red, and let me give it padding. Okay, I think I can add padding here. Let me add padding from here. Okay, let me just padding to make it look better. So now we have our button, though the text is not given. So let me use a text style and give it a color, and I will say colors dot white. Okay, so this should be good. Okay, you can also make it bold if you want, just depending on how you want your UI to look, because this one is not really giving me what I want. So let me use font weight of bold. But most times it's better you just use the dedicated buttons that Flutter already provided. Okay, it's going to help you a lot. And if you also want to make this corner to be a little bit circular, you can use the border radius not all. It's going to affect all the areas. And then you pass radius or circular, and then you give it the radius value, and it's going to round it for us. Okay. So this container is another amazing widget that you can practice. Just go through it and see how it works. You can also make this thing to be wide if you want to fill the whole screen of this widget. So we normally use media query, but I'm going to talk about this later. But let me just show you guys how we can get the full width of the device, right? It doesn't matter the device, any device is going to take the full width. Okay. You can also align this to the center when you say alignment dot center. So don't worry about what I'm just doing here. I'm going to show you guys later on how we can utilize this, especially when we start creating a real project, all right, towards the end of the uh, mentorship class. Okay, so now I want to add a button to validate this form field. Right now, this is just a container and a test field. It's not validating anything. It's not responding to actions whenever we touch it. It's not giving us anything. So what I'm going to do now to make this thing to be lively, to give it life, I'm going to wrap it with a new widget. And so we have multiple widgets that we can use to add click listener to widgets. We have the gesture detector and we have the inkwell. Okay, so in this section I'm going to show you guys how to use the gesture detector. Then you go back and practice how to use the inkwell. Inkwell widget is just inkwell, right? If you hover on it, it has on tap, on double tap, on long press, and so many things. You can also change the color, splash color, and all that. So this is an assignment for you. Practice how to use inkwell. So let's return back to our gesture detector. The gesture detector also have the same properties as inkwell, but I know inkwell has some kind of advanced properties as well too. You can see on tap up, on tap down, and so many things. So play around with all these properties and see how they behave. Okay, see how they behave when you tap on them, you palm, you drag, and all that. So play around with it. So what I'm going to show us now is the on tap. So with this on tap now, what happens, we can just print out something, clicked. So what this is doing now is adding life to this submit button. So I'm going to tap on it. You can see now whenever we tap, something is happening. It's printing out this value for us. Okay. So that's one way that we can use texture detection in any widget to make it lively. All right. You can also wrap it in this test form feed. You can also wrap it in your app bar. Whenever I use a tab, you can wrap it with your body. Whenever I tap on any side of this screen, let's say for instance, I wrap this with gesture detector, and if I tap, uh, tapped on body. So let's do something like this. So now if I tap on this body, okay, nothing is happening. Let's tap somewhere around here. I think something is blocking it somehow. But usually, when you tap it like this and you click on the body, it's, let me wrap it with the column and see. I think the body is not, let me wrap it with the body. So one thing I just want you to understand is with the help of gesture detector and inkwell, you can make any widget to be interactive. Okay, this is not working. I don't know. This is supposed to tap and work. I don't know why. So let's not waste much time on this. But just know that with the help of gesture detector and inkware, we can make any widget to be responsive when user taps on them. Okay. All right. So let's move on to, I'm going to remove this widget. Let's move on to the next topic here. So far I've talked about test feed, buttons, and gesture detection. Now let me talk about form, validation, and handling user input. So I've talked about handling user input as well when we created this test form feed here. So I'm going to talk about how we can, this user input is also another way, is we can call it form. So we just have a form, login form and all that. So but now let me show you guys how to validate this user input. And to validate it, we will need the help of forms, okay? So to do that, since we have this our test form feed, and the button inside this column, in order to add a proper validation to this stuff, there are so many ways you can validate, okay? You can validate using, say, we have our if statement. I talked about if statement in our that lesson. You can see all those things are coming into Flutter. So make sure you go back and study it in case you don't understand it. Go back and study. So we have our name controller.test dot is empty, right? So we are not checking if the controller.test is empty. If it's empty, what we can do is to print name is empty. You know, most times when you're filling forms online, and if the values are empty, you will receive this message that says a form is required and all that. This is part of how they, validate it. So you can see now we are getting this result, name is empty. We can do the same thing too for phone number by saying if the controller.test is empty, we can say phone is empty, just like that. But right now we're only getting name is empty. The reason is because phone is not empty. There's a value inside of it. But if I clear that value now and click on submit, you can see we have name is empty and phone is empty, right? That's one way of validating input. But most times using this method, it makes our code so messy. So imagine if you have like 5 to 10 form fields here, you need to use if statement on all of them, and it's going to make your code messy. So another easier and simpler way that we can do this is, first thing, we are going to use the form widget, right? The form widget. So we're going to wrap the parent widget that is housing our test input fields. So in this case, is the column, right? Because all these test form feed, test form, test feed, they are all inside the column. So I'm going to wrap this guy with a form widget. So this form widget, it helps us to validate input, user input. And this form widget takes something very important, which is it takes, what is this? It takes a key, yeah? It takes a key. The key, we are going to use a form state. So we are going to use this form state to validate the inputs that are inside that form. So what I'm going to do first is to come up here. I'm going to create a global key. Okay, inside this global key, I'll put in my form state. Global key acts like an identifier, right, to identify widgets. Keys acts like identifier for widgets. Okay. So here we have our form key. You can use final in case you don't know the data type. It's fine. Final key, global key, form state. So inside here, we're going to say, let me rename it to form key. And inside there, I'm going to pass in this form key. That's the two things that we need first. Creating this variable and then wrapping this parent widget with a form widget and then passing the key inside the form key, right? That's what we need. Later, I'm going to talk about keys, global keys, value keys, and all that, why we need them. So now let's go down to where we have our button. Instead of doing all these things that we just did here now, what I can do is to say, if the form key variable that we created, if form key dot current state, right? You use the nullable operator because most times it can be null, dot validate, right? So what it's doing now is going to validate it for us, okay? Once it validates it for us, you can now print something like all fields are valid. So at this point, we can now perform any action that we want to perform with the test form field, because at this point, it's not going to be empty. But for now, we have not added any valid validation for this form field. If we click submit, it's going to give us all fields are valid, even though the strings are empty. So for us to handle this validator, to give it something to check, we are going to scroll down to where we have our form keys, our form test field. So inside here, let me just bring it down. We're going to have something like validation. I think we should have validation inside. Let me quickly look for it. Is this? I'm not seeing validator in our test field. I can't remember the last time I used test feed for things like this, but we have this input formatter. I don't think that is it. No, that is not it. Uh, okay, so I will skip this test feed because I don't think we can validate properly. I've not really tried. The one I use in almost all my projects is this test form feed. So test form feed, if you come down here and click, you see that it has a validator, right? So this value, this property is not available in test feed. So when we say validator, it takes, you can see the value. So this validator, now what we can do, we can run all our if statements inside here. We can do something like if value dot is empty, right? Make sure you handle. So if it's empty, you can just return feed cannot be empty, right? It takes a string like so, right? Yeah, it takes a string. But if it's valid, we can just return nothing. So let's just leave it like this. We can return null, right? So if everything checks, we can just return null. So right now, notice if I click on this button, because we already have this validator check here, and we have added our validator to this guy, if I click on submit, you're going to see that there's a validation string that just shows under it, and automatically the color is changing to red. So this is telling us that, hey, you need to add something, like the feed cannot be empty. So if I add in a string now and I say submit, you can see now the error immediately disappeared. And now we are seeing this result. All fields are valid. I can check for other things. Let's say I don't want the value to be less than 6. So we can say dot value dot length less than 6. We can return value must be at least 6 characters. Okay. So I'm going to save that. Right now we have how many characters? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. If I submit, you see the error is going to show. Value must be at least 6 characters. Now we are validating for multiple teams. If it's empty, we'll see a different error. If the characters are less than 6, we are going to see a different error message, right? So this one is far more better in terms of validation compared to when we use if statement on the controllers for this one, okay? So in the case whereby this test field does not have a validator, we can use the other method by saying we can just check it first. Once this one checks, okay, we can now check here if the name controller dot test is not empty and all that, then we can validate the strings right inside this if statement. Okay, so this is one way that we can validate strings, validate user input, and validate a lot of things, right, when using the form and the form global key, the global key form state. Okay, we can use that to validate strings, validate user input, and all that. Okay, so that's a lot. If you are lost, just go back to the video we watch it again, you're going to understand it perfectly. All right. So now we have talked about text field button gesture detection. We have talked about forms, validation, and user input. We have talked about navigation between screen, right? When I showed you guys how to use Navigator.push. So I've not talked about pop. So after this one, I'm going to show us how to pop from one screen to another. And then we are going to do a hands-on, create a simple login screen, okay? And then validate those login screen. So what is going to happen here now? Once all fields are validated, I want to return back to this screen. So this method of calling Navigator.push, right? This one is going to take us to a new screen, right? And if you click on this back button, automatically the app bar is going to handle that for us, right? By navigating us back to the screen. So here now, what I want to do, once everything is validated, once user submits and everything is validated, I want to take user back to that screen automatically. So to do that, you can just use Navigator.pop. So what this does, it pops the screen back to the initial route, like the initial screen that opened this one. So if I save it, let's say now I validate all the string. If I validate this, let me use 6, right? Submit. You can see all fields are valid and automatically it navigated us back to the previous screen. Okay, this is what Navigator.pop does. It removes the screen. So let me explain how Navigator, like navigation, works. Most times, so navigation is more like when you have a parent screen, okay? If you click Navigator.push, there are so many properties that we can work with. .push can pop, maybe we have push, we have pop and name, push named, which is if you are using string in terms of named routing and all that. So we have push and remove until. I'm going to show you guys how to use push and remove until. So let's say, for instance, you have a Dix. You have like, okay, how do I want to put this? You want to stack, you have books, pile of books, right? You want to stack them. You have like the first book, then you bought another book after reading it, you added it on top of the other book. You added it on top of the other book. Just as you're getting more books, you're adding them on top each other, like you're stacking it. Okay, that's what Navigator.push does. It stacks rejects upon reject, like new screen upon new screen on top of the initial one that we already have. Okay, that's what Navigator.push does. Then if you call Navigator.pop, what happens? It removes the most recent book that you added on that stack. It removes it. And then what you're going to see is the one that follows. If you keep doing Navigator.pop, it keeps removing the top layer, the top stack, the top book, one after the other until it gets to the last one, right? That's how Navigator.push works. And Navigator.pop just removes the stack one after the other. It's just like saying first in, first out. First in, how do I put that? First in, last out, something like that. Yeah. If it's the first one that you put in the stack, it's going to be the last that you're going to remove from the stack. Okay. Last in, last out. Yeah, we can use that. All right. Another way again, say for instance, now we have a book. Okay. One thing about this is when we use Navigator.push, right, you will notice that automatically the app bar gives us this back arrow here where we can route back, right? You might be wondering, why don't this other app bar have that same thing? Okay, that's because the other app bar, we called it from the main by saying, we just called it like a home button. We did not really navigate into it. We just called it like a home button. So there's nowhere that user wants to go back to. Okay, so it just remains as the main page. So now let's say now, for instance, I decide to, okay, back to what I was explaining. Let's say now we have another books. We have the first book stacked on top. And then after reading that first book, I went on to buy another book. And now that initial book, I don't want anything. I don't want to do like I don't want to read it again. I don't want it to be in my house. I don't want to like let it all occupy space. What I can do now is to remove it. Like I can now throw it away or dash it to someone or put it in another place. Then the new book that I bought becomes the first book now, right? If I get another book, I will remove the old book and then put the new book just like that. Every time I keep having just one book. So that's what we can do if we decide to go with this other method, Navigator.push and remove until, okay, it takes a context, it still takes the same material route, okay, and here we have this predicate. We can just put a context and let's return false, okay. So what this is doing is whenever we navigate to a new screen, we are, once I click this button, I'm going to comment this. Once I click this button to go to a new screen, I'm telling Flutter to kill this screen, discard it completely. I don't want it. Okay, so this is what happens. And if I click on it, it's going to discard it completely. That means this now becomes the only screen that we have, the first screen that we have. And if you notice, the app bar did not add the back button for us. Now, if I click on pop, what happens? Since there is no previous route to navigate to, the app will just show blank or it will exit the app. Let me validate all this. So notice what happened. It shows a blank screen because there is no initial route to navigate to. All right. So most times you can use this for maybe if you're working with splash screen or login screen. Once user gets to the dashboard, you don't want them to go back to the login screen again. You want to kill those routes, those login authentication routes. That's where you use this one. Then say you want to take, let's say your WhatsApp, for instance, now. When you open your home screen, you are seeing all the screens. You're seeing your dashboard, you're seeing all your chats. When you click on each one single chat, it opens the chat details, right? What they do there is using the Navigator.push to handle that. All right. They use Navigator.push to handle that. So it doesn't kill the previous route. Then if you're a new user coming into WhatsApp, you will definitely need to put your phone number, you will sign in and all that, right? So in that process, once you have signed in, they have authenticated you, everything is correct. They will now navigate you back to your dashboard where you will now see all your messages. If you notice at that point, you cannot go back to that login screen again because that route has been killed. That's where the Navigator.push and remove until comes in. Okay, so I hope with these few points I've been able to make this clear for you. Push and like maintaining the previous stack and also killing the previous stack. Okay. All right. So I believe that is clear, and let's do a hot restart just to get our app back to how it was. Okay. So now what I'm going to do now, we are going to have our hands on. So far, we have been able to cover test field, buttons, gesture detection, forms, validation, handling user input, navigation between screens. Now we're going to talk about hands-on, create a simple login screen. So this login screen is just going to do something. So what I'm going to do here, I'm going to go to the user input screen. I want to start everything from scratch. So I'm going to delete this, right? You can see we are seeing error here, which is understandable because currently we don't have this screen, right? We don't have any class with this name. So I'm going to quickly create a stateful widget again. I'm going to maintain the same name. Let me just copy and paste it here. User input example. All right. So in here, I'm going to return a scaffold widget. Okay. So now you can see our screen now just empty. With the scaffold widget, I can now add an app bar and you can say login screen. So this login screen is just going to take email and password. All right. So here I have my body and I have the column with the children, right? So I want some spacing to be around that, but let's just move on first. So I'll use my test form field because it has validator, so it's better than the other one that I used. So I'm going to save it. Now I have my two test form field. So let's create a size box of height 20. And then I won't be using a normal test widget. I'm just going to use the elevated button that we used before. Let's use our elevated button. Okay, so with his, I'm going to create a simple test here and say submit details or login, whatever. Okay, so we have this button here. Let me quickly style it so that it's going to look a little bit better. So we have our button style, color. I think that should be background color, I guess. And we have our widget state property, colors.blue. All right, so this works. Cool. You can also style the text if you want. So I don't want to go too far. So right now, you can see with this, like this, we can now create our controllers. We have our controller, which is going to be the email controller. We also have another controller, which is going to be the password controller. So at the top of this screen, just since it's a stateful widget, just at the top of this build method, try as much as possible to avoid writing any code inside this build method, right? Because this build method will be built every time we save or we process state. It will be built continuously. So, and most times when you write kind of like any code that takes time to load or return any feedback, it's going to make your app to be janking, right? It's going to be hanging and all that. So try as much as possible to avoid that. So here we have the first and the second test controllers. We have the, okay, let's just leave it like that. You can do that way anyway. It's going to work. So we have our test controller, email controller, and the password controller, right? To just validate. So let me quickly style this guy the way it was previously. So we have our label test, and let me add border, outline input border. I love this input border a lot. So it gives me that perfect outline. So we have this one. This one is going to be password. Okay. So here now we can wrap this guy with a padding. So this padding widget is going to give it spacing, proper spacing and all that. Okay. So we have our email and we have our password. Okay. So password is going to be a test because users can put anything and also numbers, right? And you can also decide to obscure it. I think we have something like a property, obscure test. You can say true, right? So what this means, as users are typing, it's going to obscure it. You can see that's how password works. There's a lot of properties that you can work with. So just go through the properties available and just see what you can do. You can also change the characters. Say you don't want asterisk, you can use hyphen, right? You can use hyphen for it. Okay, what happened? The obscuring character that length equal to 1 is not true. Okay, we just need only one. All right, I added a lot, so just one is going to identify it. Okay, so you can see how it's looking. Hyphen, hyphen. Let me zoom out a little so that you can see. You can see the hyphen, hyphen, and all that. Okay, but let's just return it to the default, which is an asterisk. So depending on how you want your app to look, you can modify the obscure text and all that. Okay, and you can also add a button here to toggle, right, true or false and all that. Okay, so let me show us quickly how to do that. I know this is an advanced topic a little, but let me just show you. So we have bool show password. Sorry about the noise. All right, sorry about the noise. So we have show password. So this show password now by default is false, right? I'm going to pass it here, obscure test, show password false. Okay. So when I say show password false. That means the password is going to obscure tests. Yeah, by default is false. So if I say false, that means it's not going to show. It's going to show password. Okay. Let's say obscure password. Let's use this instead. Okay. Let's say obscure password. Okay. Then I'm going to show you guys how to add a little icon here. And to do that, we have preface and suffix, I believe. So that should be inside the decoration. If you hover on this inbuilt decoration, you're going to see that it has icon, it has preface icon, it has surface icon. Okay. So we can use the surface. So you should know what surface means here. So let's use this. We can use an icon, right? Icons dot visibility. Yeah, if you want, you can see how it's showing nicely there. I know this might be a little bit confusing, but it's fine. We have the visibility. So we can also change the button. If obscure password, we are going to change it to visibility on and visibility off, right? So I'm just showing you guys how to create a simple login screen. Okay, we are going to talk more about all these things in details as we progress in the mentorship program. Okay, so this is just saying, this is more like an if statement, but it's a one-line if statement using operators. So we say if obscure password is true, return visibility, a different icon, right? If return this else, this means else, return a different icon. Okay, so here now we have this icon. Right now it has no action, right? So this is where our gesture detector comes in, where we can wrap it with gesture detector. And inside here, we can say untapped. So with the untap, we can now, let's just print something to be sure that it's printing out. So if I tap on it, you're going to see, okay, let me scroll down to the bottom. You're going to see that this guy keeps printing out. So now what I want to do, remember we are using stateful widgets, and I told you initially that stateful widgets are immutable. Mutable, that means we can change the values, unlike stateless widgets. But so because we are using stateful widgets, we can call set state. You'll see this mostly when you run the counter app. So what this set state does, it rebuilds the widget for us. And then let's say it rebuilds the widget, and then we assign the value of obscure password to another value using this operator equal to not, right? This one means not. I talked about it in the that class using not operators and all that. So if I tap on it, you see that it's changing the visibility for us and everything looks good, right? And the buttons too has also changed. Okay. So now to be quick, let's quickly wrap up this guy. So now I want to validate this string. And once we submit, I'm going to navigate back to the previous screen. Okay. So to do that, I will quickly create our form key, right? Just as we did previously. And we have our global state, global key. And here I'm going to use form state. Make sure you always define the type of key form state that you're using. I'm going to talk more about that. I told you I'm going to talk more about global key in the comment section. Okay. So right here now, we are going to wrap this our column with a form widget. And inside here, we're going to pass the key and put in our form, right? And one thing that we missed is to add validator for our form field. So we can just say if that is empty, right? We can just return email is not valid, or return null. Okay. So we can do these two things and also validate the password as well. So password must have a length of 6. Password must have a length of 6. So we can say that length, if it's less than 6, they will say password is too short. Okay. Now, once we are done with that, we can now come here and do our validator by saying form key dot current state dot validate, right? And then from here, we can just print. First of all, let's print out the value. Let's just print out email controller dot test, and also we're going to print out password controller dot test. Okay, so this is pretty much it, how we can validate it. So let me quickly run down what we have done. First, we created our controller. We created our obscure password to be false. Okay, we created our form key as well, and the form key is just used to validate input fields. Okay, with the form key passed under the form, we created our test form feed and we added our validator logic to validate if it's empty or not. You can add any other validation that you want. Okay, you can see here this controller, we passed in the email controller as well, and we created some other things for password, the obscure password. We added surface icon as well to show toggle between visibility and not visible. Okay, and here we just check the validator mode to check if everything is valid based on what we have already specified here. All right, so now I'm going to quickly click on this button. You can see now, first thing is to check for the email. Email is not valid, so I'm going to add any email. Let me just add a string. You can also validate email later with maybe at gmail.com, but that's another topic later. We're going to discuss about it. All right, we can now click submit. There's already a password here, that's why this one's not validated. So let's remove this password and tap. You can see it's going to show this error is too short, so we can now tap, okay, and submit. Now we can see the result and everything. So once everything has been validated, we can now go back to our previous screen, Navigator.push. Okay, so now let's validate. We've done and validate. Now we are back to our previous screen. So guys, this is everything that this is everything you need to know about handling user input and navigation in this class. Okay, so I urge you guys, the assignment that I've given to you guys to go and practice and all that, make sure you practice it and study. Study is very important. Tomorrow we are not going to be having a class, so make sure you use tomorrow to study very well, and at least give yourself 2 hours every day to go through all these things. You're going to be good at it. Okay, so practice, try to experiment with the different widget that I talked about, Inkwell especially. Experiment with the different properties on long press and all that. And guys, thank you so much for being part of this today's class. Okay,